So there's been a lot of anticipation and hype building up around The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, but how does it compare to Breath of the Wild? Some people leading up to the launch of Tears of the Kingdom were saying, hey, it's just going to be like a big DLC or something because it's set in the same world. Is it really that? Well, spoiler alert, no, it's not that at all. It is way, way bigger and way better than I think most of us could have ever imagined, but this is going to be my spoiler-free review. I'm going to be as spoiler-free as I can. The B-roll you guys are going to be seeing in the background is probably going to be a mix of some trailers, but also just like a bunch of B-roll in the starting area, kind of like how the Great Plateau was the starting area for Breath of the Wild. I'm going to be sticking in the starting area, which is the Great Sky Islands, which we've seen Mr. Aonuma demonstrate some gameplay around there, and it's going to be kind of walking around up there, collecting resources, fighting some random enemies and everything like that, to try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible, okay? So do bear with me. I'm going to be mentioning a couple different things. I'm not going to go into any kind of story detail. I will kind of briefly mention a couple different things regarding temples and things like that, but I'm not going to go into, really heavy spoiler territory, just kind of, some things I thought that were strong about the temples and some gripes I had with them, but again, I'm going to try to be as vague and as general as possible, but I'll try to give you guys warning when I'm about to go into some of these other topics, and maybe you're going to find spoilery. Again, I'm not going to be diving into, heavy story stuff or anything like that. I'm going to be very vague about the story stuff, and it's going to be stuff that I would hope is not going to be found as spoilery to anyone. But if you're extremely sensitive to spoilers, obviously, then maybe don't watch this video. I'll just say that I do recommend playing the game right off the top. There you go, you have my recommendation. But if you want to stick around for my in-depth details and kind of, my full analysis and my full kind of review score and things like that, then let's go ahead and proceed with the rest of this video. So Breath of the Wild was such a big success that they obviously wanted to reuse the world. A lot of people love the world of Breath of the Wild, so they thought, hey, let's reuse the world and make a sequel of a game. And that's why a lot of people thought, oh, is it just going to be kind of like a big DLC? But not at all. They've completely reimagined and constructed the world entirely. There's this whole event called the Upheaval. You may have seen how the Hyrule Castle was kind of elevating in the trailers. That's called the Upheaval event. I'm not going to go into details about that, but basically with that triggered a whole bunch of other stuff, and that kind of, wiped out all the Sheikah stuff that we've seen from Breath of the Wild and introduced a bunch of Zonai stuff. Now, I'm not going to go too much into the Zonai territory because a lot of that's going to be considered story spoilers for a lot of people, but I'm going to be talking briefly about Zonai stuff. And again, I'm making this reveal like 2.5 weeks after the game came out to try to avoid spoilers as best as I can. Plus, I was really busy making guides for you guys here on the channel, so there's also that. So basically, there's a bunch of Zonai lore and technology that's going on in this world. And so, in terms of shrines, yes, shrines have returned, but they're new. They're different shrines. They're not Sheikah shrines. I'll let you discover a little bit more what that's going to be about. Again, I'm not going to show you them on screen. If you do want to see a bunch of gameplay and different things like that, I have a ton of guides, like 95 plus guides, I think, so far up on the channel. It's crazy. So we go a little bit more into that if you're curious about that. In terms of how many shrines, there are more than there were in Breath of the Wild, but not drastically more. I don't think a number is going to be super spoilery, so I will throw a number out there, just be warned. There's 152, so 32 more than there were in Breath of the Wild. Now, in terms of the whole sky area, it's not massive. It's just kind of like little islands and things like that, besides the starting area. The starting area, which is the kind of Great Sky Island, which is going to be the B-roll I'm going to be using in this review, that's the largest kind of area. The other ones are kind of smaller areas. There's stuff to explore, but it's not really significant or substantial. It's not nearly the size of the ground level, if you will. I will say there is an extra area. I don't want to spoil too much. We've seen a little bit of it kind of in trailers, and it's way, 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 way bigger than the sky area. And it's a whole other area that is not including the surface area. It's a whole secret area. And it's pretty much the size of the surface area. It's pretty large, and there's a lot to explore in this place. There's a lot of loot in this place as well. A lot of treasure chests that have, variety of different gear, which we're going to talk about briefly in a second. In terms of the Sky Islands, they're really fun to kind of navigate. But you're going to have to get creative with some of the new abilities. Speaking of the new abilities, if you haven't seen, which I'm sure you guys have, there are 4 new abilities. So all the Sheikah abilities are gone. Okay, we don't have those anymore. Instead, we have these new Zonai abilities, and again, I'm not going to go into the lore behind that, but basically what they are is Ultra Hand, which has to do with grabbing and moving objects, kind of like the Magnesis from Breath of the Wild, so we still have that available, but what we can do now is we can actually stick objects together. So we can do, what we can do is like, you know, stick a bunch of logs together, and then stick, like not a sail, what do you call that? Well, it's a sail, basically, on top of it, and then we have a little mini kind of makeshift raft. For example, right? And so little things like that, you can get extremely creative. There are insane creations people have made of this. I mean, the possibilities are endless just with this one ability alone. It's crazy. Then we have Fuse. Now, Fuse has to do with attaching something to an equipped weapon or shield. So you can basically do anything to it. It usually enhances. So there's certain fusible items that will have like a number with it, and that means it'll add that much damage to that weapon. So if it says like Fuse 30, for example, then if you fuse that item to a weapon, it's going to add an extra 30 attack to your weapon, for example. And there's like different things. There's certain kind of mushrooms called puff shrooms that if you attach it to your shield and an enemy hits it, it's going to create a big, you know, cloud of smoke, and it's going to blind them, and you can sneak behind them and kind of, you know, stealthily assassinate them and whatnot. Really, really cool in regards to that. So the possibilities with, you know, what you can kind of fuse together, there's a lot of combinations that is just absolutely insane. Then we have Ascend. Ascend is something that you're going to have to get used to, like, knowing that's even, you know, possible, because basically Ascend is the ability to, if there's like a ceiling above you, unless it's way, way, way above you, but if it's, you know, if it's low enough, you can basically look up using Ascend, and there's going to be like a green circle. If it's a red circle, it means you can't ascend there. And when you use Ascend, you're going to go through the ceiling up to whatever's on top. It's going to be useful because if you're in caves, for example, you can just ascend and end up on the top of a hill. Very, very useful. I mean, there's so many practical uses to that, and also creative uses, right? Like if there's, let's say, something high up, or let's say there's like, you're like in kind of like a box, but the box has no ceiling, but you have something that you could put on top as a ceiling, then you can put that above you and ascend through the roof that you just added to this box that you're inside of, let's say, and then you can ascend there. So there's just the creativity and the way to solve different puzzles is just going to be it's just really, really unique in and of itself. And then we have Recall. Recall is basically reversing an object's movement, which you can get very, very creative with. I've seen people kind of swing things around an enemy and then recall it, so then it's just kind of swinging around the enemy and hitting it. I mean, there's so many crazy uses to Recall, but there's also the fact that, let's say you put your makeshift raft that we were talking about into a body of water, and it starts flying off because you didn't jump on it quick enough. You quickly use Recall on it, and it'll move it back in time, back to, you know, where it was. So Recall is really, really cool. Then there's a hidden ability, and this hidden ability, it's not too spoilery. I'm not going to tell you how to get it. You can watch the guide if you want to see how to get it, but basically it just helps instantly recreate items that you've created, because again, you can create all these different kind of like Zonai items and stuff. Like I said, the makeshift raft, for example, is one, and so you can recreate instantly a bunch of these Zonai abilities. Now, speaking about Zonai devices, there are plenty across the world. Again, we've seen in Mr. Aonuma's gameplay before the game came out. One of them was like fans, for example, and there are a ton of different ones. I mean, there's fans, there's mirrors, there's like sleds, there's like these kind of like gliding sort of things, like wings, basically. There's hot air balloons, rockets, there's, you know, different things like that. And when you kind of get creative with these things, you kind of attach them together. I mean, for example, a hot air balloon, you could take that, you could stick it onto a piece of wood or whatever else, light a fire underneath it, even if you're just holding a torch, and hold the torch underneath the balloon, and it's going to raise the balloon up. I mean, the Zonai devices by themselves add so much possibility and so much creativity. It is absolutely insane. And it's just an absolute blast to go through. So there's all of that. In terms of like weaponry, I mean, breakable weaponry has returned. There are a ton of different kinds of weaponry. You know, there's bows and shields, and there's weapons, all kinds of different weapons. Now you have these Zonai weapons that have been introduced as well. You know, obviously you can fuse things together. So you can have like a stick, and you can fuse a boulder to it, and that creates a hammer or anything else. I mean, like I said, the possibilities, I mean, the only limit is really your imagination and your own creativity. Really, really cool with that. So again, a lot of what you had in Breath of the Wild, but the creativity aspect of it you know, possibilities with it is just completely endless, which is really, really nice. In terms of materials, a lot of the materials that you know from Breath of the Wild have returned, you know, like all different kinds of fish and different kinds of enemy parts and stuff. But now enemy parts have a different use, for example. So you can now, when you have an arrow, when you're pulling your bow and arrow, you can use the fuse ability to go ahead and attach something to your arrow, technically. So you can fuse, for example, a Keese eyeball to your arrow, and it basically acts as a homing arrow, which is really cool. It kind of seeks out the enemy. So there's a bunch of different possibilities with that, like choo-choo jellies. If you know, attach a normal one, it's going to be like, I think it's like ice. No, not ice. It would be water. There's electric choo-choo jelly, the yellow ones, that'll like electric, you know, turn your arrow basically into an electric arrow. Different things like that. So a lot of possibilities with that. There's also Zonite materials. You're going to use that for a variety of different things. You know, trading them in and exchanging them for other resources, such as Zonite charges, which has to do with recharging your battery, because you have a battery cell that is linked to any Zonite devices you use. So, for example, the fans we were just talking about, if you hit that fan to turn it on, you have a battery, and that battery is attached to Link's hip, and you can increase that battery just like, you know, you can increase pretty much anything else, your stamina, your hearts, different things like that, which also returns, by the way, four shrines equals basically either a heart vessel or a stamina vessel, just like in Breath of the Wild. You go to a goddess statue, exact same thing there. So, like I said, there's a lot of familiarity to Breath of the Wild, but there's a lot of new things. Like I said, a lot of enemy parts and the possibilities which you could do with these different parts, with the ability to fuse them to items and make your items even stronger, and different things like that, or just turn them into like elixirs, right? A lot of enemy parts could be turned into elixirs. So, you know, cooking is returned as well, and there's a wide variety of different kinds of recipes you can cook. There's also, you can check recipes now, so any recipes that you've cooked before, you can, when you're under the food category, you can push X on your controller, and you can open up a whole food category and check out different recipes that you've learned and that you know of. Which is really nice, because if you made something and you're like, oh, how did I make that? You just check your recipe log and you're pretty much good to go. So that covers a lot of it. And then we got our gear. So like armor, different things like that. There is so much armor. So all the armor that was basically in Breath of the Wild, and then like all the DLC armor that they'd released for Breath of the Wild is all in the base game of Tears of the Kingdom. A lot of the DLC armor you can get from scanning amiibos, but they're also, if you don't have the amiibos, you can find them in the world. Again, I have guides for all of that on the channel, but there's a wide variety of different armor. Some of them have different kind of buffs, like stealth up, for example, or you know, different things like that, you know, shock resistance, or, you know, cold resistance, wide variety of different things like that. So it's really, really cool. Also the ability to now glide. So when you're kind of, you know, jumping off of a ledge, you can glide where, you know, Link kind of puts out his arms and you can kind of like, you know, maneuver like, you know, left, right, back, front, and there's special gear as well that you can get to kind of helps you with that. So, you know, they've just kind of they took what made Breath of the Wild great, and they've expanded it so much that it's not just like a DLC. We got like the world, like I said, is just kind of been revamped. I mean, obviously the main locations on the surface level for the most part are unchanged. They're familiar, but there's also some elements where, you know, things have been destroyed, or there's new things there, new structures that have appeared, you know, or different, you know, land masses that have appeared because of this whole upheaval event. So they found that kind of way with the lore, with the story, to kind of, you know, readjust certain things and kind of take away things, introduce new things, and different things like that. So I think that covers most of the base kind of exploration stuff. Again, the game is so massive, I'm trying really hard not to forget anything, but I want to go a little bit into just talking about the story. I'm not going to go into story details, but what I want to say about the story is that it's similar to Breath of the Wild, where you can technically miss story beats if you're not doing everything that you should do. So, for example, you can go and you can track your main quests in your adventure log, and you can follow the main quest to make sure you're getting all that done. And part of it, you know, is collecting all of these memories, kind of like in Breath of the Wild, that are scattered throughout the region. So you could miss a bunch of cutscenes if you don't do that, for example. All the memories have, you know, some pretty significant story cutscenes within them. And that's something that I didn't like about Breath of the Wild, but that kind of is what comes with the nature of an open world game. is that those are typically, you know, missable in a way. It's not, because it's not guiding you through some like linear experience like, you know, Twilight Princess, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, pretty much any other Zelda game before Breath of the Wild. And that's something that I don't really like about the game, is that with Tears of the Kingdom, it definitely feels like they're pushing you a little bit more towards the story, and they're helping you, you know, being able to track these main quests, and being able to show you like, hey, you should probably go here to experience this story and different things like that. But again, it's still the fact that it's missable and that you could technically just, you know, skip it all, and you know, it takes away through that kind of going through a narrative experience a little bit for me personally. Again, you gotta keep in mind reviews are subjective, so that's something I didn't really like, and that's something I don't like about the open world. The open world's really fun to play, but it's not something that personally I really think about, oh, you know, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna replay Breath of the Wild. I loved my time with Breath of the Wild, but it's kind of the game where I'm like, all right, well, I'm done. Whereas the linear Zelda games, I have more of a pull to be like, okay, I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna replay them because I want to experience the story, and it has a different vibe, and I don't feel like that about these games. And I feel like once I 100%, you know, Tears of the Kingdom, I might explore here and there, but once there's nothing else to do, that's pretty much it for me. I don't know if I'm going to really go back to it. Not the same way I do with other games. So that's kind of a gripe I have with the open world. And then we got the temples. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to try to keep it as vague as possible. But with the temples, so the Divine Beasts, they were kind of a sorry excuse for a temple to begin with. A lot of people had problems with that. They brought a little bit more of a traditional sort of vibe to the temples, but I would call them a hybrid. I would say they're a little bit of a hybrid between a Divine Beast and a traditional, you know, temple. They're not traditional temples whatsoever in the you know, kind of traditional sense, if you will. They kind of lack that vibe. They lack that feeling. And one of the gripes I had with the, you know, temples in here is that most of them have a similar mechanic that you have to complete, whereas traditional temples, it was always different. There was a different vibe. There was like every temple was unique in and of itself, and they all had different mechanics and different vibes to it, whereas they were themed around something, just like the Divine Beast, like water or fire or electric or, you know, wind or whatever else. But the mechanics, the idea, if you've done the temples, you know exactly what I mean. It's kind of like you have 4 or 5 objectives to do, and it's like pretty much the same thing that utilizes a certain power from that temple, but just changed for the theme of the temple for each one. So I found like they felt a little bit lazy to me. They're not very memorable. They're far more memorable than Divine Beast, but they're not anywhere comparatively to me to, you know, traditional dungeons and traditional temples, if you will. They still left a lot to be desired for me personally, but I will say that the bosses in these temples were more traditional 100%, and I really did enjoy and love the bosses in the temples in this game. They were really fun, great music, great vibe, different kind of ways to take them on mechanically, just like you would expect from traditional dungeons. So the bosses definitely felt more traditional, but the temples themselves left a lot to be desired, and just to me still lacked a lot. But I would take them any day over the Divine Beast. They're definitely a massive upgrade, but they're still falling, you know, drastically short, in my opinion, significantly short from what a traditional dungeon is supposed to be, traditional temples. So that's kind of what I got to say about that. In terms of the whole story, I think this story was more well done than Breath of the Wild. I loved Breath of the Wild. I gave it a perfect 10 out of 10 just for clarification's sake, even though I had a lot of gripes with it. I still thought it was a masterpiece of a game. But in terms of the lore and the story, I think that this game just kind of pulls you in more, captures you more. And obviously just with the Zonai theme, if you don't know, Zonai has to do with a whole ancient civilization. So the whole fact of that, you know, that's already intriguing. And then everything that kind of happens with Link and Zelda and the land of Hyrule. And of course, as you've seen, Ganondorf is making his first return since, I think, Twilight Princess. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was the last time we've seen Ganondorf. Obviously, Skyward Sword was demise. We've seen, you know, Ganon, right, which is not really Ganondorf. Ganondorf is the Gerudo, the kind of human version. Ganon is more of the monstrous version, like we've seen in Breath of the Wild, right? Calamity Ganon, for example, or Ganon from A Link to the Past, for example. But Ganondorf we haven't seen for a while, so it was really cool to see him make a return. And so everything going on with this whole kind of world and whatnot, it was really well done and way more intriguing and way more interesting in terms of story and lore than I think the first game was. And as you go through the final boss as well, I think that was just really well done, really well executed. I feel like there's certain elements in terms of like the darkness of this game that kind of gave me a little bit of like hints of Majora's Mask in certain ways, and I really loved Majora's Mask. It's one of my favorite games of all time, so I like that little kind of, you know, hint of that. I would have wished it was maybe a little bit more, but yeah, it's pretty crazy stuff. And just the way that the ending happens in this game, I think, is one of the best endings to any Zelda game ever. Yeah, it was pretty good. It was a pretty good ending. The way they wrapped up the story, the way the whole story ended in this game, it's pretty phenomenal. It will leave you just like floored, breathtaking. The final boss was just an epic, grand spectacle. And you know, to be fair, Breath of the Wild was as well, but this one just took it to a whole new level and a whole new extent, which was just beyond anything else. So that's that. Now, I think that covers everything I can really say about the story without going into spoiler territory, so I'll leave it at that for story. In terms of quests and things, I think there's a good amount of side stuff to do. I wish there would have been a little bit more, I guess, intriguing side stuff. Now, for clarification's sake, I have not yet 100% did the game. It says I'm at 54.77% at the time of recording this. I've done all the main stuff. I've done a good chunk of the side stuff. The reason it says that is there's still a lot of side quests. There's side quests and side adventures. Side adventures are more of like, they have a little bit more story to it, right? Side quests are more like, oh, I really want to eat this kind of food, and then you got to go get the, you know, ingredients and cook this kind of food for this person, and then, okay, here's a reward. That's more of like a side quest. Whereas a side adventure is more like, you know, rebuild this village, and there's like, you know, a bunch of steps to it, and there's a whole, like, a little bit more story to it and things like that. So there's that. It's nice, but you know, I've done all the shrines. I think another thing that is holding back my percentage is the sheer amount of Korok seeds that are back in this game. Yes, there are a ton of Korok seeds. Once again, way too many than I think there should have been, and I do have a little bit of a gripe with that personally. I don't think there should be as many as there are in the game, but it is what it is. So there is that. And there's a lot to do in the world. You know, the Korok puzzles, they've returned with, you know, a lot of the ones we knew from the original game. Obviously, we also have some new ones as well, which helps. I mean, there's certain puzzles that actually give you 2 Korok seeds, so that helps a little bit, but I mean, still, there's still way too many Korok seeds than there should be. But yeah, a lot of great story going on in here. I don't think I'm missing anything. I really hope I'm not. I'm you know, give me 1 second. I'm going to do a quick cut here because I need to really think this through for a minute. Yeah, I think that I've covered pretty much everything I can without spoiling anything. I guess the only thing I'll say is like enemy types. Obviously, there's a lot of enemies that we've come to know in Breath of the Wild that have returned, but there's also obviously new enemy types, especially around the whole Zonai theme. And then there's also some other ones that I can't say or spoil, but there's some new enemy types that you're going to encounter in this game as well, that are just going to add a little bit more depth to the game. And you know, your typical stuff have returned, like, you know, your great fairy fountains, so you can upgrade your gear. But they've brought all these back in a way that makes sense, especially with the whole scope of the story. And I think it's just really well done how they kind of executed this, where it actually feels significant in and of itself. It feels like a whole separate game, even though it's built on the same world, and even though it's very familiar, it's also very unfamiliar, and you're gonna have to, it's gonna completely break everything that you learned about Breath of the Wild because of the new mechanics, because of the new things going on in the world, you know, like I said, the new abilities. It's going to make you, it's going to force you to rethink everything in ways that you never would have imagined. And so I think they really executed this very, very well. I think the game is amazing. Although I'm more of a fan of the linear Zelda games. I love exploring the open world, but I would prefer the more linear experience, personally speaking, just because I like being driven through a narrative rather than thrown into an open sandbox. Even despite that, and even despite the fact that I feel like the traditional dungeons fall short, and well, they're not traditional. That's the problem. They're more traditional, but they leave a lot, you know, to be desired. A lot that's lacking with them. Even then, they're way better than the Divine Beast. And even with my gripes that I do have with this game, I think it's a masterpiece. I think it is significantly better than Breath of the Wild. I think if you enjoyed Breath of the Wild, you are absolutely gonna adore this game because it is so good and so well done. So in the future, I do hope that, you know, open world is just kind of a mechanic. I know what Mr. Onuma said, but hey, you never know. I'm still holding on to hope. But for this game, it works for this game, and it was significantly better in Tears of the Kingdom. So with all that said, what am I going to give this game? I have to give it a perfect 10 out of 10. It's a masterpiece of a game. It is perfect in a way, okay? It's not perfect in the sense that there's nothing bad for me to say. I have gripes with the game, like I said, right? I have problems with the temples. I have problems with certain things. But even then, it's not enough for me to not give this game a perfect 10 out of 10 because it is so good. The lore, the story is absolutely phenomenal. The bosses, the enemies, they're so fun. The exploration's fun. All the shrines are an absolute blast. All the gear that's in this game, there's so much gear that you can go and collect and different things like that. There's so much to do and so much to see. The story, like I said, is really good. The ending is phenomenal. All the stuff they've added is just really cool to, you know, discover for the first time, with that secret place I mentioned in the whole sky area as well and all that. So again, even though I have some gripes with the game, I still think it is worth a 10 out of 10 game. I think it is a must play. I think that you'd be crazy to not play this if you enjoyed Breath of the Wild. If you're just, you know, thinking that it's just more of the same. It's not more of the same. It's familiar, but it's also extremely unfamiliar in so many ways because they've just kind of broken everything that you thought you knew about Breath of the Wild, reinvented it for Tears of the Kingdom, and it's just phenomenal. So anyways, that's my review. Again, I might have missed some stuff, but I think it covers everything you really need to know anyways. Let me know if you've played it, or if you haven't and you've been considering it, what's holding you back? Let me know. What would you rate it, you know, out of 10? Let me know in the comments below. And lastly, do you want to see every Zelda game be open world in the future, or do you agree with me where, you know, the linear experience is maybe preferred? Let me know where you sit on that spectrum. Let's just open up that discussion down in the comment section below. Otherwise, thanks for watching this review. Stay safe, stay well. Be sure to subscribe to stick around for more Zelda and Nintendo content here on the channel. And until the next one, game on. I'll see you guys soon.